Good evening to all the panelists. I extend a warm welcome to each one of you for joining us today in the panel discussion on AI across borders, a global perspective on artificial intelligence. This panel discussion is part of the Emerging Technologies and AI Governance and Policy Landscape initiative of IGPP. Our primary goal of this initiative is to actively participate in the evolution of AI regulation, contributing to the creation of robust, adaptable, and organic regulations that ensure effectiveness and sustainability. By doing so, we aim to assist Indian lawmakers in navigating this transformative shift in the AI landscape. For this, we will be employing multifaceted approach, focusing on awareness, collaboration, and innovation, with insights from various stakeholders, lawmakers, industry experts, researchers, and social scientists. Today, we are here to discuss the global perspective on AI and what it holds for the future of AI. AI is a topic that was barely on lawmakers' radar a year ago. Governments around the globe are now fiercely debating the pros and cons of regulating or even prohibiting some of the artificial intelligence technologies. Today, with this panel discussion, we seek to understand the global perspective on AI from different standpoints. To provide us with the insights into this intricate landscape, we have a distinguished panel of experts who will share their perspectives on the state of artificial intelligence worldwide. I welcome you once again. So today we have with us Ms. Aparajita Rana. She's a partner with AZB and Partners, an independent affiliate with Berkman Klein Center for Internet and Society, Harvard University. We also have with us Mr. John C. Havens, Executive Director, the IEEE Global Initiative on Ethics of Autonomous Intelligent Systems. We have with us Dr. Chiranjeev Roy. He's Vice President and Global Head of Data Sciences and Applied AI, Course 5I. We also have Dr. Avik Sarkar, Senior Research Consultant and Visiting Faculty, Indian School of Business, and he's a member in Indian Datasets for Artificial Intelligence. We also have with us Mr. Ashish Jaimin. He's Director of Product in Microsoft. The session is being moderated by Dr. Manish Tiwari, Director of IGPP and co-founder of Ranga, a digital parenting app. Now I hand over the session to Dr. Manish Tiwari for further.
Thank you so much, Ranjana, and thank you, everybody. I welcome all of you on this panel. Over the past few years, we are witnessing a rapid evolution in the way countries and international organizations are trying to regulate AI. And there are debates about whether we should regulate AI, whether the state should do it or the companies should do it at their own, or there are 1,000 kind of things happening around. And I would say a whole array of opinion whether it should be regulated, not regulated, how to regulate, all kinds of issues. We have different technical and governance kind of pacts or models, starting from Canada's AI Strategy 2017, the EU's recent proposal on comprehensive AI regulation, G7's Hiroshima AI process, the Bletchley Declaration, AI Policy Observatory of OECD, Global Partnership of AI, all sorts of institutions are evolving. In India, which is supposedly the one of the largest markets, and also if we talk in terms of data, it's a provider of the largest data sets to the world and the companies. How are we going to govern it? That's the question, and we want to know from all of you who have global experience of what is happening, what is not happening around it. And this is where I want to begin with Dr. Ashish, with Ashish ji, with you first. And I just want to know from you the whole thing around lawmakers, they have been struggling to understand technological innovations. And what foundational understanding is essential before implementing regulations on artificial intelligence, considering the prevalent misconception among lawmakers that there are more dangers of AI than any other, I would say, benefits. People are talking more about the negative of AI.
Thank you, Manish, and thank you. I'm privileged to be part of this panel. Honored. So I'll start with this, right? Every new innovation, right, and is all about, it can be used as a tool to empower societies, to empower individuals, to empower institutions, but it also can be weaponized by bad actors to create harm on individuals, on societies, and institutions. AI is not different. We have started talking about AI quite recently, actually, in the bigger scheme of things, in the technology innovations. For last 5-ish years, everyone started talking about AI, and then from last year on, everyone actually is thinking about generative AI. Now, from a lawmaker's perspective, right, this is a very interesting place that they are in. In fact, from a Gen AI perspective, it's a very interesting place that technologists are in as well. You know, if you read, even from the very highly decorated, you know, technologists who have actually participated and created this phenomenon of AI, even they don't understand a lot of details, explainability around AI models, right? So it becomes even more challenging for a lawmaker who is coming from a very different background. So from my understanding, from my thinking, from a lawmaker's perspective, first thing that they need to understand is not like 500 level of technology so that they become an AI expert, but at least a very basic understanding of what this new technology is, how does it work, what are the, I'll say, go to at least a level of understanding that they understand that, hey, this is not just a black box, right? Data goes in, something comes out on the other end. That could be recommendation, predictions, generation, but bad data would produce bad outcomes. So understanding that, what is machine learning, what does it even mean when we say machine learning? Does it have cognitive abilities, does it have no cognitive ability, whatever, right? What does it mean to actually understand and learn what data is? What are these models? On a very basic level, they should at least understand, so that they then can start thinking about what are the uh, what are the implications from good and bad. So that's first thing. The second thing is, how is it being used today, right? And again, they have to think a lot ahead, then because their implementation and thinking about regulations policy would have a long-term impact on societies, on individuals, and so on and so forth. So starting to think about what are the current applications, what are the limitations, what are the opportunities, what are the ethical and societal implications. Start thinking about governance, right? Now, what do they need? They need not just to talk about ethics and governance and bad uses of technology, because that's where any early adopter of technology knows that bad actors are the first ones. They are the early adopters to figure out, how to stretch the boundaries of that technology, right? So understanding that is important. But the other thing which is very important for them is to also understand the part of innovation which actually could be very, very helpful, the potential to do social good. They're in the business of doing social good. They're in the business of creating policies. So the potential of doing social good is very important. We talked about, harmful but risk models, threat models, you know, uh, what are other doings, right? So regulation is very jurisdiction based. At the end of the day, regulations are India is for India, regulations in the US are for US. So having a global perspective on what others are doing is super important. And then, create or have a very multifaceted kind of coalition where they can learn from everyone, right? Not just technologists, but ethicists, the social society, social engineers, legislature, technologists, everyone else have to. So they have to actually have a very wide scope on talking and learning from others.
I think, thank you, Ashish. Two words which I could catch from your, what you have described, what actually is needed. I would say, the point of discussion for policymakers. One is like bad actors and social good, because one of the major targets of I would say regulating or governing anything is like to control these two things, like what social good could be done and how to stop bad actors. I would like to come to you, Mr. John Havitz. That you come from more towards the ethical part of the whole AI and innovation. Can you elaborate a little on the regional variation in AI system adoption and implementation, particularly in the context that most of the big techs are situated in the global north? Like how this whole question of ethics and good use and not bad actors coming into how it's dealt in different regions differently. So please.
Sure. Well, first of all, I just want to say thank you again for the invitation. I really appreciate being here, especially with these other experts and voices and backgrounds. And also being from the global north, really, I'm excited to learn. I have colleagues in India and friends in India, but I don't live there. And so also that perspective is really important. I had the opportunity last week. I was in New Orleans, here in the US, at the NeurIPS conference. It's a big artificial intelligence conference. And I was really excited. I was invited by a group of primarily women who run a group called Global South in AI. And I learned a lot from them too about the need for the Global South to be included more overtly, directly in AI creation. So I guess I'll start there, which is the term ethics a lot of times is used in the work I'm in, but pretty quickly I ask people to use the word design, because the second a word like good or bad is used, instantly we all as human beings have our biases. There's probably universal things we'd agree on. And I believe, forgive me if it's Dr. Rana or the lawyer on the call would know better than I would with some of these things, so forgive me. But human rights is about law. Law is different than ethics. They're very connected. But like in general, we would all say, let's make sure to protect children. Why I talk about design is ethical discussions about morality are useful, but design in terms of regulation, and then in terms of who I work with are primarily engineers. IEEE is the world's largest engineering family around the world, thousands and thousands of members from India, Bangalore, et cetera. So I want to talk about also, just as a framing for some of what I'm going to say, is the word innovation. And also, Dr. Jamin, I really enjoyed your message, and I will say maybe as provocation. I disagree that AI is the same as other technologies, very much. Here's why. First of all, artificial intelligence are two English words shoved together that relate to dozens of different types of technology. Methodologies, we have brute force learning, machine learning, deep learning, and now we have large language models. Then in terms of the data that's used, at IEEE Standards Association, we use the term, and the OECD adopted it, artificial intelligence systems. AI does not run on its own. You don't create an algorithm and it does something. It always uses human data or data from nature or the planet. And by the way, in one sense, Dr. Jamin, I'm not trying to disagree. I recognize, or at least what I interpret it is, we shouldn't fear a new technology or a series of technologies because they're new, integrating them into society. So that, by the way, again, I'm just, for these conversations, it's fun to be, have a provocation to a certain degree. Anyway, but the data is something for over 15 years, and I've wrote a book on this subject back in 2014. How human beings understand their data, how they are able to access that data, how they are able to utilize that data is a human right, period. And in the digital world, and soon the metaverse world, that's getting more and more clear to us. A key thing that does make artificial intelligence very different is a sense of agency. When a new technology is introduced to someone, how they are first explained about how that technology will affect them and their family is a key opportunity for innovation, especially around things like genuine informed consent. I used to be a EVP at a top 10 PR firm. I had clients like Gillette, HP. So I very much understand, compliance is not like a sexy, fun word. Like, hey, let's go to that compliance convention, Compliance, however, means connection, community, communication. And my last point, because I want to make sure I don't take too much time before coming back, and the IGPP, I was looking at your brochure in preparation for this talk. You talk about society, and I think there's this massive opportunity for innovation around a couple of things. One is when one recognizes the critical importance of language, especially with artificial intelligence, and whether it's Tamil or one of 7,000 languages, many of them indigenous languages around the world, that so far, from my understanding, have not been fully immersed into large language models. It's not about pointing fingers. It's let's put morals over here, let's put ethics over here, and just talk about the reality and the timing. And this is not pointing fingers at any company or anybody else. It's simply saying, if these tools are largely about using language, and there are many, many languages that aren't part of the systems in ways that the users and the people who speak them understand, there's the innovation. What a beautiful time to say, once these languages are incorporated into these systems, and go back to the people who don't know those languages. I just read a paper written by a number of Portuguese people from Brazil, deep, really learned AI scientists, data scientists, and that I can send you the paper, basically said it works better for people who speak Portuguese, and in this case from Brazil versus Portugal, to do the research around their own language with the large language models. And then they use things like local education from classrooms, from learning about culture. And that's the other thing, is that language so deeply reflects a culture. And if we don't have someone's language and their culture as part of these systems, if we can use words like erasure or colonization, but also, and those are important words to use, especially with regulation. But I like flipping the word innovation around, because I think I know if innovation is always assumed to be related to rapid growth and progress defined as efficiency and productivity, and really where the main metrics that we all agree on are financial. And this is my last point. Then the social issues, the nature issues, the people issues will always be prioritized after the economic discussions happen first. And for any country around the world, the real opportunity for beautiful, joyful innovation, real innovation, is to say the systems, economic paradigm level systems. And I'll say this, I keep saying it's my last thought, cut to 8 o'clock and I'm still talking. But the planet has planetary boundaries. COP28 just ended. I live in a, quote, developed global north country. From what I know, America produced a majority of pollution that has harmed India and so many other places around the world. And we're developed. See, that doesn't make sense. So the point is we have to prioritize the planet and people first. These resources will not continue for the rest of time without protection. And the opportunity to use AI to protect the planet and people first, and then talk about the stuff we normally talk about, that's the real innovation that we have to do.
Thank you so much, sir, to put it so beautifully. And this, usually the discussion about society, culture, the context in which, and particularly on languages and people who should be the first, usually gets, I would say, they just see more as a market rather than as people or a culture or a context. And definitely these are challenges which the big tech has to come up with. I just want to go to Ms. Aparajita Rana. You come from a law background, and what Mr. Heavens have said about how it should be, what should be the priority in terms of the planet and people. Do you notice, why the world wants to regulate AI? Is it the right time to put guardrails on this nascent technology, or as the technologists argue that we need a kind of a free ride because of the what you call as we need more technological development, we need innovation. All these regulations would curtail innovation. What do you think? Why the world wants to do it, and how are they doing?
Thank you. I'd like to just start with echoing thoughts of my other panelists. Thanks for inviting me, and I'm privileged to speak amongst all of you. So I think, this conversation, at least given that most of my experience has been in India, the experience about this whole conversation that, well, we would like to enjoy a regulatory sandbox kind of situation for just an indefinite period of time, or at least till the time we can make this technology profitable for us. And, any kind of regulation kind of thwarts that objective. I think that conversation India at least has experienced in terms of financial services, cryptocurrency, digital lending, and now we're experiencing that with AI. In fact, if you see today, we have a data protection law, which is we're still waiting for a notification date on that. And it took about 4 years for that law to come into effect. And but before that as well, the whole conversation was, let's see how this, this processing can be of benefit to people. We are helping people with predictive advertising. We're helping people make informed consumer decisions. All of that did occur. But at the same time, a lot of this data has now been monetized to such an extent that, many of the companies, for example, who I work with, they don't even know what do they want to do with the data. They've collected it and it's kind of on the back burner, and they're going to figure out their purpose and their use cases later. So I think the reason that it's being regulated now is because we are experiencing, at least in the global north, most of these companies, as you mentioned, many of the AI development is happening in those countries. So I don't think it's premature to say that we are unable to see the impact of these technologies. We can. Perhaps we can't see them in countries like India because we don't have indigenous AI technology as yet at that scale. But you can learn from the experience of other countries. We are seeing what is the possibility with these technologies. I know at least at the global governance level, a lot of governments are concerned about the use of AI for autonomous, what do you say, that weapons. They are concerned about the impact on critical infrastructure. They are obviously very concerned about the kind of influence that AI technology can have onto democratic processes in the countries. So one is the geopolitical concern, which I think has been the trigger in many countries deciding to come forward and agree on some principles. And I think currently we are still at a stage where we are at a principle stage. Many of the countries that, at least basis my experience so far in the policy space, it seems that we are still lacking that kind of specificity, right? I think EU is the only bloc that has come up with a law now. And I think the final draft of the legislation should be available soon. But if you see the previous version that was being discussed, it's quite evident that, they have really put in a lot of thought into how should we adopt and really implement a risk-based approach, which currently at G20, at G7, all these forums, including OECD, all the conversations are I would say at a very general level. They haven't reached a stage where you can actually start implementing it. In fact, I was at a dinner yesterday and I was meeting someone from the policy space in the UK. And I was asking him about his experience at the GPAI summit. And he said something really interesting. And he's like, it was a great experience. But I think in terms of stakeholder multilateralism in the AI space, his view was that we are building a plane while we are flying it. So I think, at least that is what I feel is happening. So as a lawyer, as well as somebody who is a recipient of AI technology, it will impact many of my life decisions and, my families and people in countries like India. I think it is time to move forward from those principles, be updated as to what is it that other countries are doing. Because I think it would be unfair if, a region like the EU starts regulating technology from a human rights perspective, and countries in the global south are regulating AI from innovation and an economic perspective. Because eventually, ultimately, what does that mean? As you said in the beginning, India has the highest amount of data sets, and which is why I understand our own, objective in trying to monetize that data set, because you can gauge a lot of patterns and a lot of information from the kind of diversity that a country like India has. And we're still at an internet penetration that leaves a lot of scope for, there can be a lot more Indians, a lot more people coming onto the internet spectrum, and, which you can monetize by way of that experience. But I think it would be unfair that there are countries that are enjoying a more human rights centric approach, and people who are representing a vast variety of population in the world will simply be monetized, and the technology will essentially impact all aspects of their life, but it would be based on very vague principles, and not what is the eventual impact, and whether some kind of high risk use cases in countries like India should be regulated.
Thank you, Mr. Parajita. I think your mentioning of data sets, and particularly the question of like how people should be treated, like, so data sets are largely people behaviors as of now. I want to come to you, Dr. Avik Sarkar, first. Like, you are a member of the Indian Data Sets for Artificial Intelligence. How do you see it, particularly like in terms of like whatever regulations we are thinking of or we want to bring in, their impact, particularly on the, I would say, the policy imperatives of for companies, particularly because definitely these two aspects of one is like people, another is like human rights aspect, and another is the technical and the innovative aspect. So how do you see there is what kind of balance we can bring through policy imperatives?
Yes, so thanks to IGPP for inviting. I think it's a very pertinent time that we are talking about this, just a week after GPAI, and Aparajita, thanks for bringing up that point. I was in the room when I think someone from UK mentioned that we are trying to design the airplane while we are flying, and I think that's true. If I always look at technology as a whole, and when we look at technology, usually we have to look at technology, let it develop, maybe come to a stable position, and then we sort of come up with the regulations of that. So if you see, I take the example of automobile quite often when I also teach the students on this regulations at ISB, Indian School of Business. So we came up with automobiles maybe the late 1800s. That's when the time accidents started. Seat belts came in around 1920s. Again, not because of regulations. So the innovation of seat belts, the way we wear it today, the 3-pin one, came in only when some family member of Volvo was hurt, and that owner and the president of the organization take it to heart that we have to build something that is foolproof. So it didn't come from real R&D as the main source or the community, but because of personal loss that came into, and the whole technology was made available to people that other automobile companies could adopt it. Then there is also the other aspect. So if you talk about safety on the road, there is one which is about street lights, the red and the green light. That's on the government side. or the city side. And then there are seat belts, and then much later airbags came in. Airbags is a much more recent phenomenon. So that's when the innovation came in. Now, if you look into the regulations for mandating use of seat belts and in the manufacture of automobile and also in the wearing of automobile, US was one of the first. That came again 40 years later in the 1960s, the 1950s, some states started, and 1960s it started. And then over the time, Europe adapted it around the 70s, 80s. And in India, a mandate came in much later, only in 2000. China also around that time. So as John was talking and also Ashish was talking previously, that there is a big cultural aspect to it. We know that when we are driving a car, we want to be safe. We don't want to be we don't want to die on the road. That's a very obvious thing that we all agree. And that's where I think when Aparajita was talking about, we all agree to the principles. And we are all in that principle stage till now, all nations. And we have not gone and come to the regulations yet, because regulations will again depend on country to country. EU again could come and do the regulation, the EU Act, which came out and the final version is coming up, is also because they are only looking at outside companies coming in, developing the AI, and their citizens are being impacted by it. So they are not in the space of innovating. Whereas if you look at US and China, and they have some regulations, they are in US, the US companies are innovating. In China, the Chinese companies are innovating. In India, we have to be a bit relaxed on the regulation side because we have to promote our startups. And I think John talked about a very important point. Often we are looking at this whole world from the business perspective, the profitability perspective. In India, we have a large amount of issues which are social issues. And the social issues, if we need to be addressed, we need social entrepreneurs to come in. And all of this innovation or startups might not have a foolproof business model that to make them profitable. They might not become a big tech at the end of the day, but these are problems that need to be solved, but there is no money for them. So how do we balance it? So you need to have a bit of a relaxation and IGPP, when you're looking into policy makers, this session is for policymaker, you told. I think policymakers have to first look at innovation so that they can bring the whole society inclusivity. When we came up with our AI strategy, and I was part of it when we developed it in 2018 for India, we told it AI for all. So we had different revolution, industrial revolution, the internet revolution, but we couldn't bring everyone into the parallel. Not everyone was part of the development. Today, if we see, I have a smartphone along with me, and I'm sure all of you have either Apple or a very expensive smartphone, but there are a lot of people in India, out of the 1.4 billion, only 200 million speak in English. Rest of them are detached from the innovation that we are talking about, be it ChatGPT or the LLMs of the world. So we need a lot of innovation to come. And for that India-specific innovation, it brings to the question that you asked me, actually coming after a long time, that data sets are very much important. Sorry, I took a long route to come to that. So data sets become very, very crucial. Data sets, particularly, we see the English language so well developed because the US government, DARPA particularly, have funded a lot of projects over the last few decades, making data sets in English available. At Indian level, we don't have data sets of that level available from the Indian government or the Indian language side, at least for the 22 official languages that we have in India. So a large initiative has started in India called the Bhashini. There is also an initiative that was started 2 years back, AI for Bharat, which are trying to solve the Indian problem. So if someone in India cannot interact in English, can they still take advantage of the digital revolution? Currently, we have a big digital divide. So we have to promote a lot of innovation, and so data sets become very important. Other than that, there are many other data sets which also need to be untied, particularly healthcare data. We have a large number of infectious diseases in India, which which there are solutions for, but we need people and doctors to go and solve them. Often there are not adequate doctors that we have in India who can go to rural areas and solve them. So particularly a few ones which are low touch, we are trying to work on them, and I am personally working with a few startups who are working on eradicating that. One is tuberculosis. India is one of the countries with the highest burden of tuberculosis, something that we know spreads from people to people. If we can make data sets available in the public domain, we can solve it. Cancer, breast cancer particularly, is another one. Diabetic retinopathy. So there are data sets that are available with the government, with private hospitals, with hospital chains. How can we anonymize it and make it available? The other thing that our datasets group is also looking at is what we call as the privacy enhancing techniques. So we don't make the data set available to the public, whereas we make APIs available. So your API, so you can write a piece of code, that piece of code will come to the data, and it can only go through the columns in which you have access to. It will only have access to, say, the age and what disease and what medication was given and what diagnosis was given. Only those columns. Build the model and only take out the model parameters. Cannot take out the actual data. So privacy enhancing techniques is something you can think of, say, what Google Maps API is an example. So if all of you know that all this ride-hailing cab services like Uber gives their distance estimation based on Google Maps. Now, Google doesn't expose the entire data to them, but if you give them location A and B, the Uber gives location A and B from a customer. Google Maps API will tell you how long it will take to reach from point A to point B. So without giving access to the actual data, they are giving some access to the data just from an API perspective. So you give this A and B, it will give you the time estimation. So that's how this whole Uber is running, based on Google Maps. So this is the example we are trying to do. So this is a type of protocol that we are trying to develop in India for healthcare data, where government hospitals will have the data of the patients, which will lie there. Organizations can access the data, build the model, and take back the model parameters. Privacy enhancing techniques is something that we are is in a very nascent state, and there are some use cases being worked on that. So because this is a very so for say Bhashini, the Indian language, privacy is not that much of concern. So we are making those data sets available in public domain. But when you're looking at domains like healthcare, where a lot of private data exists, we want to make it available in the public domain, but using techniques which are much more complicated, where you can take advantage, keeping the privacy intact. So each domain has its own dynamics. Financial domain, we have a DEPA framework. DEPA framework is there, where it has particularly created how financial data can be shared with consent. So the individual consent is used for that purpose. So for each domain, we have to balance what innovation is required in the ecosystem, what the legislation and the regulations of that sector are, because financial sector, all of you know, at least particularly the people from India, other than John, you will know the financial sector is highly regulated. And we have a central bank which is regulating how data can be shared, another one. So where consent becomes very, very important. So we have to look into each domain in its way. But the objective is to make data available. But given the riskiness of the domain, the privacy, the data value, what we can lose, we are taking a domain-specific approach and making data sets available. So a lot of work going on in India. I'll stop for now and happy to take something at a later point in time.
Sure. Thank you so much, Sarkar, because I'm more excited at this point because it brings me to a kind of the classic development debate in sociology or political science. Yeah. Because, as we are mentioning, what is the innovation, what is the human impact, and starting from dams and roads and jungles, everything, we have had this whole debate about what kind of development we want. Now, I'm really happy that, the points which John has made and which you are making and which Aparajita has also made, what exactly we need and what kind of innovation we need, what kind of impact we need, and how do they can go together. They need not to be separated. So if I'm looking at it from a social perspective, from societies and people's perspective, it comes like that. I want to come to you, Dr. Chiranjeev Roy. we have talked about definitely just now startups and other things. So what might be the impact of AI regulation on innovation and startups that lawmakers need to understand before going ahead with AI regulations? Why I'm saying it, like, we just talked about whether it would curtail regulation, the innovation, or whether it would help us, have a better human impact. So what is that which they need to understand first? Dr. Chiranjeev Rao.
So, thank you, first of all, for this opportunity to be part of this distinguished panel. Thank you, IGPP. I think after hearing everybody, it's very much clear as of today that we need to accelerate. Yes, of course, the plane is important. It travels from one place to another, right? As we sit on it, we have to build on it, right? Make it more experiential, because artificial intelligence, I've been working in this space for last 20 years now. The first models that I used to run for the bank in Canary Wharf, London, was an Excel file, right? Where I used to predict who should get a credit card or not. And today we are sitting where I just have to speak and the model will be developed. Startups play a very, very essential role, and we know it where it has come in through, right? Both the sides, right? So from a positivity, right? India has seen much more than anybody before, right? You talk about Paytms, you talk about Zoho, you talk about multiple organizations who have accelerated, given birth to natural innovation. I think sometimes I call it that post Second World War. I think this is where we are starting up, right? This is the place, and it's a group of like-minded people who continuously start talking about it, make it happen. And as Dr. Sarkar said, right, these data sets would be consumed by the startups to make different problems being solved at an application level. Imagine we would have to go to the bank to pay a tea seller 5 rupees, right, to have a tea, but not today, right? You just pick up the phone and just do it, right? We have gone too far, right, on that area. There is a lot of work which is required. It's still there. Now, in this case, as things would be opening up, and we know that there have been a lot of breaches which has happened, right? There is a huge amount of privacy challenges which will come into picture. Dr. Sarkar said we would have APIs, right? RESTful APIs are the best ways to, at least technical right now at this point in time, to at least start off with at a data set level, right? Because without data set, you cannot even predict anything, right? You can't even go into that piece. What's important about technology are the two major things. Number one, the people who make it, the people who consume it, right? And we know the Uber stories of the world, right? Where things were made the way it has to be seen. So there are people who are making it, but what are we solving? We are solving the process part, which is the next most important. We need to govern the process. There has to be educative decision, not just at a policymaker level, but also while India is growing up in its knowledge, the people will also, who are making it and consuming it, they would also come into picture, right? So in this case, regulations would and should encourage innovation, as John said, right? You can create frameworks, right? But ethical and responsible artificial intelligence is something that the policymakers should definitely learn and create at the same time, because the technology from now onwards, right? So LLM is a reality. Metaverse took time, right? But LLM is now a reality, and it's the 2024, 25, 26. In the next 5 years, things will exponentially grow from here. we would not be able to control things. So hence, what's controllable and what's uncontrollable in a process needs to be known, learned, documented, educated. It's very, very important at that level. You should not choke the neck of the startup. But yes, from both the standpoints, when you are applying for a startup, because I work for multiple organizations, big, small, and I consult for them, right? And everybody is hyped about it, right? I need information now, I need explainability now, I need this and that. That enthusiasm will die if you start choking the neck for the startups, right? So what we need to do is to document it from the grassroots. If I'm applying for a startup, right, or an idea, there are multiple, Niti Aayog and NASCOM, and a lot of people are trying to go on that area. While I'm applying for a company account, right, let's say MCA, I should tell what is the product that I'm making, how am I making the product, is there a process documentation? Definitely, as John just said, design is very important. You definitely have that design. IEEE ACM has the standards, right? Why can't you write it down? You should write down what are you going to do, how are you going to do, how much is exposed, how much is not exposed. You need to be transparent. So transparency is the mother of innovation, and that's the only way that you can go in through. Yes, we have seen, and that's what people hide more to say more, right? And words are twisted. More than that, in AI, the work is also twisted, right? Because you need to understand that artificial intelligence is not a magic wand. It's not Harry Potter, right? It is an approach which is very process driven, right? And you cannot flaw it. You will be caught, right? So I'm sure people have seen the Google's Gemini case that which has just happened, right? Should that have not happened? I don't know that answer. But it creates a sparks in everybody's mind that yesterday when OpenAI, Microsoft, started with explainability, right, in a language driven conversation, so you don't even have to type, right? You can get any answer at any point of time. Today we are getting into responsibility, right? There is continuous question which is coming into picture. So both the sides, the consumer, policymaker, the maker, all have to educate it. I think process is the best way, right? To start off with, there can be other intellectual property protection rights, and I think everything will fall into place while I start documenting it. So I would say that process needs to be coming into picture, and process needs to be learned by the person who is signing the check as well as the person who is actually creating the law for it. It's important, at least at a process. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. You have brought in two very important terms like explainable AI and the transparency, and then you are talking about process. I just want to come to you, Ashish, at this point. Like, explainable AI is promoted to increase transparency of AI models. I want you to explain our audience like what exactly explainable AI is, and how does the incorporation of explainable AI contribute to building trust in AI adoption in context of digital transformation of critical infrastructure like health? How do you explain it to our audiences, please?
So explainability of AI, it's a very interesting concept actually, and it was simple when we had simpler models, right? The challenge is with these deep learning models, especially the models that we see now, 70 billion, 140 billion, and like 650 billion parameters, and they're trained on it. The way the model behaves, it's becoming very, very complex to actually start thinking about how do you explain the predictor of the next word that the LLM does, right? Yes, you can put things there, you can try to understand it, But right now, we're just talking about the model, the language model, right? The pace of innovation, like as we have seen in last year itself, and the way it is going is becomes very, very complex, right? So the biggest challenge with explainability is a balance between complexity versus what is the trade-off, right? The more complex the models become, it becomes very, very hard to figure out how they made the decision, either the predictability or whatever the decision making is. So I think going back to, I think most of us have talked about this, is transparency is super important, right? In explainable AI, if you think about explainability, right, what I want to do is whenever someone is using this model, can I be transparent with them? It's like, hey, this is how the model was trained, this is the expected outcome, and if it actually doesn't give expected outcome, then I need to actually figure out why and then go back in the cycle, right, to retrain or whatever, right? So transparency is super, super important, right? Why was the decision made? Can I get insights on how that model actually made a decision if it did, right? So that's one. The other thing is, which is actually super, super complex, is interpretability, right? Can you actually understand the inner working? I actually last week there was I saw this panel discussion with Jeffrey Hilton and Isla and others, and even they are challenged, like they are baffled with like what these models are now doing, right? It's very, very complex, right? Interpretability is actually very, very important. Can humans understand the logic? Can they comprehend what it is doing? And the last thing is like justification, right? If that particular model make a decision, can that actually provide justification on why that was done? So having those insights, interpretability, and justification are the key concepts. Now, you talked about healthcare in particular. Healthcare is a very, very, it's a regulated domain, right? I think finance is for financial motivations, but healthcare is so interesting to intrinsic to humans that it is so much regulated across everywhere, right? So the challenge with healthcare is the trust between, when I visit a doctor, when I visit a hospital, the reason I go there is like, okay, I'm sick, but there is a level of trust as well. As when I go to this hospital versus this hospital, this doctor versus this, I have a level of trust. Now, if the decision making is done by AI models, I need to actually have that kind of trust there as well, right? So building trust is super, super important. uh, Compliance, which we talked about, it's a highly regulated industry. The thing that we should also think about is, if the model misbehaves, right, then can I identify, and explainability actually solves it, it hopefully solves it, right? Is, can I identify why this happened, and then can I rectify that, right? That is super important. I think trust is super important. And then the last thing I'll say here, which is actually very, very, like, we cannot talk about ethics without the context of culture, right? And the context, it's very like there's no, like, we can, yes, talk about, there are like, okay, there's a truth with the capital T, and then there are truths across the globe with small t's, right? And that is like, whenever we talk about, so ethical consideration, especially in healthcare, I understand, because, but the problem with these models, they're black box, right? I, from the industry, been working here for forever. Uh, I can ask questions, but you think about 99%, 0.99% of population out there don't even know what the right question is to ask, right? Forget AI models; they don't even know what the right questions are to a doctor, right? And we bring AI into this model, so understanding that what are the right questions, ethical considerations with context, uh, confidence, trust is so important, especially in healthcare. And explainability is actually a very, very recent. The idea is old, but the way the technology is moving, especially with Gen AI, it is becoming very, very complex actually to start building those models which can explain themselves. And the process, as I think Dr. Roy said, is like, start thinking about the process rather than the outcome and input and output. Like, at least if we understand the process, we'll get somewhere.
I want to, like, the whole question again goes back to ethics, and like, we really have to look at the human agency, particularly around it. I want to come to you, John, again to you, asking you, like, who should we put the burden on of the ethical and fair AI model development? On technology professionals only, or it's like the regulation, government, people, users? Who do we put this burden on?
Well, it's a great question. I want to say a couple of things, and Dr. Jaman, I really appreciate what he said. I don't think it's fair, to your immediate question, to put the burden of explainability only on the technological companies making the tech. But I also want to remove the word burden. I also want to point out, I'm keenly aware this conversation is in English. I like English. It's the main language I speak, but I don't think it's the primary language in India. I mean, again, I don't know Tamil, etc., but like, that's not a small thing. Like, I'm keenly aware that I'm sort of speaking, and again, I really appreciate this invitation. I'm also keenly aware that India has more people in, the country than anywhere else on the planet. So I'll be honest, I feel very humbled to provide insights, recognizing I'm talking to people with a place I've been to twice. I went from my plane to a conversation with some of the kindest people I've ever met, some of the smartest people I've ever met. And then I went back to the plane, So I also wanted to point out, just as a connective tissue for me, the Aadhaar regulation from a privacy standpoint, I still think is one of the boldest, most innovative tests that was ever done for humanity. The billions of people, I think it was, multiple millions of people who were connected to a sense about their data. And here's the reason I say respectfully, I want to change the narrative around a lot of these AI conversations where I can, where again, I'm respectfully making recommendations if they're useful. If we use the word burden, it's always going to start a conversation. And again, I'm using this as an example, not to critique, your question. But I was thinking about while Dr. Jamin was speaking about how hard it must be for explainability. I have a friend named Raja Shatila, who is a world-renowned roboticist. He's a key part of GPI. He's part of the EU AI team that created the AI Act. He's a friend. And I was getting all upset about explainability. This was like 6 years ago, and he's like, he's French, he's like, Jean, he's very relaxed. He said, especially with explaining certain types of algorithms, he'd say it better, but there's an impossibility, I think, about explaining things. So I'll give an example. I'm a musician. I play blues, guitar, and harmonica. I was thinking, Dr. Jamin, and I say this respectfully, this may not be the right analogy, but I was thinking, what happens if someone comes to see me play music and something about the band or the music, all of a sudden everyone says that music is what now is going to go to the rest of the planet, period. That's it. And someone's like, I don't really understand blues music. That's okay. You're going to enjoy it, And I say that because the technology is beautiful to me. It's magical. When I first used ChatGPT, it's magic. That said, I also want to go back to I appreciated, and forgive me if I don't say Dr. Sakar or Mr., if I have those names wrong. The analogy about the car and the seatbelt I thought was really helpful. I've heard that before, and I think it's really interesting because whatever the society is, something's new and is introduced. The agency, you just don't know what it means. And I'm trying to get to my direct response to the burden here, but I want to switch that around. What if we all went into rooms And with the same excitement, like I'm going to see the movie Napoleon later. I'm a big Joaquin Phoenix fan with my son. Really excited. I missed my son. What if these conversations, these words were sort of put to the side and there was this excitement about, for instance, you brought up cars. I put in the chat room Mozilla, who's one of my favorite companies to follow in terms of really connecting people to the sense of what their data means, has just done a report about 25 major car companies and how they take all human data. I believe it's internationally. I don't think it's just in the States. How technologies are built today in general means data is just taken. And in general, that's because of how advertising and companies can make money. This is not evil, but it is present. And really, the opportunity for innovation comes from saying, if we really want to talk about innovation from a business standpoint, copyright, data protections for the individual, right? I used to be an actor. I'm still in the American, what's called the Screen Actors Guild. How people get paid based on their data. These are the areas that need to innovate, at least in the US, I would assume around the world. Copyright law, et cetera. American companies, you start as a company, you get acquired in general, you get money philanthropically, or like right now, LLMs, a lot of companies are becoming wrappers, around other foundational models. Innovation, when it's framed in exponential growth, where mainly models are about shareholder growth, we need new terms. Because when shareholders are primarily a small group of people and the shares are about money, then our whole society, like we just saw in Dubai, can be focused on framing every single conversation, to a certain degree, this conversation, around like the sort of assumption that certain models won't ever change. Well, here's the innovation. In my car, and I fought for this for years, I can have attached an Aadhaar had a model kind of like this, right? If personal identity is known, your PII, your personal identity, right? I get into a car and I signal through my algorithmic musical preferences, I like blues. So the Uber that comes to me in India, if Uber or Lyft or whatever service it is there, picks me up at the airport. Now I'm interacting directly with BMW. I get to say what my data is. It is about my copyright and protections, my words that go out to the word, that form the fabric and the universe and the language of any of these models. That's the innovation. Hey, model, by the way, all the companies, I'm happy to pay them. Happy to pay them. It's not about money. It's about recognizing innovation in the AI world, at least in the US. I can speak with authority here. Mostly what's hindering innovation is the data broker model ensconced by millions and millions and millions of dollars, keeping me and people from our data. And when people say, I put this in the chat, young people don't care about their data, shame on us, any of us. I'm a dad. Who here's a parent? Raise your hand if you're a parent. All right. You don't say, hey, I think it's pretty good if you don't run into the highway. Hey, don't eat that, sharp tool. You say, put that down. I love you. I love you. Saying that people don't get something about a technology, like I love explainability in one sense. And again, we should not pressure Dr. Jiman and the Microsofts and whatever of the world to have to explain everything. But we have to set up an environment that says, first and foremost, in terms of our planet, there are resources that are not finite. Whether a company or an individual doesn't recognize that. And I say this with such respect to, I know I'm not speaking to all of India, but like my country created the pollution that's harming your country. So one thing that we should talk about is, why are we going to developed nations to ask them about how they're creating AI in one sense? Like, why aren't we going to India and saying, how do we help make sure that people breathe okay? How do we make sure that you have access to internet? And in one sense, not do anything else until the planet is taken care of. Because here's the danger about short-term shareholder value. Evil is a term that can be distracting and will put things into the framing of burden, right? I'm burdening innovation versus a freedom that comes from constraints around safety and the reality of physics. Our planet is in a place where most of its 8 billion people suffer daily from climate emergency. Emergency, not just like, oh, I'm inconvenienced because I have to use water less today. So getting back to your question and wrapping up, because I know it's hard, and thank you. I'm not sure how long we're supposed to speak. So again, I can speak a long time. I'm used to keynoting. What a beautiful opportunity to say, and again, the data broker industry, I'm not saying that they should go away. I'm saying they should be revealed. We are at a time when now the interlopers, Microsoft, I use Microsoft's on the phone. I use Microsoft all the time. So many different services. Thank you to Microsoft. But the data broker industry, right, was a tool that maybe was needed at one point. Data research, awesome. Like, it's not fair to put all data research under data brokers. But here is the myth. Here is the burden. Here is, I'll use the term evil. Telling anyone in the world that their data doesn't matter. Well, anyone on this call, because we all are the experts in one way or the other, at least that's what I can tell from here. Well, all of us on this call know that data is one of the most precious aspects of who we are as humans. And if we don't teach young people how precious their data is and give them the tools to access it and manage it, not necessarily own it, and I'm not saying they shouldn't pay the people who provide the services, but there's the innovation. And when we go to Europe, one thing I'll say here too is we recognize that Europe is Western. Nothing wrong with being Western in one sense, but dualistic, rationalistic forms of law for American or Western democracy, from my understanding from my friends in India and everywhere not from the West. This opportunity for relationality from Africa. We haven't talked about Africa. These ideas of community, right? These ideas that when you're born, you have a place and you are protected. Versus in the States, for me, as a 50-year-old male, the message I've had since I was a kid is, you gotta pull yourself up by the bootstraps. You're really not nothing until you make a lot of money. You know, like, there it is. And there's some of those ideals are great, but most of them don't say, do you understand how to care for the planet? Do you understand and are you equipped to care for those that you love? Do you recognize when you're in the West talking to someone from India, maybe stop talking and listen, because you shouldn't have your ideas assumed that they're going to work. And that's one thing. Thank you again, because in these conversations, I don't fully understand how, you know, if Europe comes up with, and their risk-based assessment stuff is fantastic. I have many friends that are creating those laws, but, you know, India, I'm so excited to learn from India. Farming, agriculture, so many lessons to be learned. And but ultimately, my final point here is, let's change the narrative. This is a time of wonder and joy, but putting the planet first. These conversations for me now have to be, hey, everybody, how are we taking care of India's planetary? You know, what about drought? What about whatever? To inform, like Microsoft, you know, buying data centers around the world. How do we help the Microsofts and the Metas of the world? So when they want to build these beautiful technologies that need computers and data centers to run, and they need air and water, air conditioning and water to cool them, we say, when you come into this part of Bangalore or this part of wherever, how do we do it in a way that works with the indigenous population, the local community, agriculture, and all of those systems together flourish? That's what a time of wonder and innovation. It's not burden. It's the opposite. It's joy. If we switch the models around and know we aren't dictated by having to put the shareholder model first.
I think these are kind of civilizational risks. You know, we cannot avoid them, and they take their own time. I just want to come to you, Mr. Parajita. Like, you know, when we are mentioning about that we should be making our own laws and everything. So, like, considering the varying policy responses to AI regulation across jurisdiction and countries, the recent Delhi declaration of AI after GPI summit concerns were raised that these agreements are only among like-minded countries. For example, China was left out, one of the major tech powers in the world. Now, how feasible do you believe it is to achieve the global harmonization of AI laws in this diverse regulatory landscape, and also amongst the kind of civilizational risk we are talking about?
Well, I think I personally feel that there will be some harmonization, but it will be in areas where countries have concurrence. So, for example, when it comes to ethics, when it comes to issues of misinformation, human rights violation, there will be some commonality. For example, I know there's been a lot of discussion and demand for having a global regulatory AI body. And I think the UN has called for it. They've asked for countries to submit their interest for that. And there is a high risk. I think there's an advisory body that they've set up in November this year. And that committee is going to give recommendations on what they think a policy should be about. But of course, while they can create a body, it has to have consensus and interest, because countries have to agree to be governed by that regulatory body. So I think, given the examples that you've talked about, which is the Delhi Declaration being the most recent, and all the developments in G20 and G7 before that, countries are amenable to having conversations. I think the issue is that there are some areas where they don't want there to be consistency, because I think for geopolitical reasons, they have concerns about disclosures from countries. Because I think the kind of technology that each country has in some areas, especially for weaponization, as well as for cybersecurity, the kind of risks, the online threats that you can pose towards other countries, I think that level of disclosure countries are not comfortable, and which is why there will be some divergence, that perhaps we don't want to be regulated by common principles when it comes to some issues. So I think in the future, in the next, perhaps 1 to 3 years, what we will see is that there will be a global body, and there is going to be some common consensus that countries will agree to, but there will be some issues that will be exempted from that regulation. And those will primarily be, I think, what countries want to do with AI when it comes to national security, how they want to use it in, let's say, times of war. I think there will be a bit of divergence in areas like that. And which is why I think the intersectionality with amongst each country comes into play, because someone like India will have very different concerns about how AI can be misused, particularly for democratic process, for misinformation, given, I think, the literacy level in our population, how impressionable people are. Even today, I think a lot of Indians don't understand that a particular content is a deep fake, for example. Like I remember this whole controversy that happened in India. When I saw the video, I was like, I mean, who will believe that, right? It looks completely fake. But there are a lot of people who were induced by that kind of content. And that will have an impact when it comes to elections. It will have an impact for public figures. So yes, India will have its own concerns. I think an economy which is a bit more sophisticated when it comes to online experiences, they will have different concerns. They may have concerns when it comes to warfare. So we will look at, I think intersectionality will lead to a bit of divergence amongst countries on areas where they don't want to come together. And until and unless, there is that common trust that everyone is willing to kind of put their cards on the table, that, well, this is what we believe this technology can do. And, these are the kind of vulnerabilities, these are the kind of possibilities that we have learned after doing an impact assessment on these technologies. Unless you have that kind of data on the table, I don't think we can expect a completely consistent governance framework for AI.
Thank you. I think from there, I want to come to, from what we are talking about the global, I just want to talk about India as of now. So, Dr. Sanjeev Roy, we have discussed, that AI regulations worldwide, to which data is fuel and the foundation of it. How do you see the data-related laws and rules in different countries, particularly in context of GDPR and DPDP Act of India? How it is going to affect the Indian companies, or maybe companies who are working in India, the global companies? How do you see that? What would be the kind of impact on those companies and their working around it?
India, as in the GCCs and the GCC companies who are coming into India, right? And more other than the family-run businesses, right, who are global multinational companies who have offices in Europe and America. And for let's take Course 5, my company has got offices in America, Europe, London to be precise, and other places, right? Is already taking the steps to use and solve problems. So, for example, the machine learning models that we build, we restrict the PIIs, right? As John said, right? So PII is a very important aspect, right? Personally identifiable information, we mask them. We use multiple data protection norms. We are already adhering, and organizations are already adhering to the norms of GDPR, right? And the new regulations being coming, because as we were just talking about, right? Compliance, it's important, mandatory, data privacy, data breach, and so on and so forth. It will be much more stronger. It will become much more beneficial, right? But the actual benefits are through the communication and education of the people, right? The people, for example, as in my machine learning engineers, data scientists, right? Data engineers, and so on and so forth. They are the people who are actually utilizing the data and putting it up, for example. But it's not just India, everywhere, right? You must have seen when OpenAI came into picture, people from some engineers from Samsung by mistake put the entire design, right, on the chat GPT, right, on this part, and hence they had a breach. But if you restrict them to use an application, an innovation, intelligence, you would then demean things which are most important, right? Now, from that perspective, organizations who are not global MNCs or who are smaller ones, let's say startups and so on and so forth, they would also have to start being accountable. For example, the way that we do it for other part of the world, right? You need to be accountable for handling that data, and that's important, right? That accountability is a responsibility of every individual on both the sides of the table, basically, right? That's important, and that accountability will only come from transparency, as I said before, right? And primarily through communication, right? And education. We need to continuously educate people, not one time, but multiple times across the layers. I think that's also should be part of the game, as in AI, knowledge of AI is getting getting introduced in the school curriculum and so on and so forth. I'm sure it will be much more going bigger, broader, and so on and so forth, right, in the next 2 to 3 years, right? While we were covering digital, AI came too soon, I guess, in this space. But educating 140 crore Indians is a an ocean task, right? So it's just drinking an entire Pacific, to be precise. But if you can vaccinate 100% of an Indian democracy, you can actually educate them, right? And it has to be done multiple times. That is where I would say. So that's where we should be all headed about.
I think that is about awareness, education, and making people talk to them, know them. That is really a challenge which we have been facing. I would say, we have, as you said, we became digital, and then this came too early. AI came too early. We were not even prepared digital. So a lot of population, including people who are educated, who are well-meaning, they get kind of they are suffering frauds and all kind of things in the financial markets, or this is normal transactions. So it's really a big challenge. I want to come to you, Dr. Avik Sarkar here. And then there I want to bring in the companies also. Like we are seeing a race for giant AI models among big tech. This competition has a chilling effect on transparency, as you have just mentioned. And today the most capable models are held in private control, data sets are not released, and there is a general sense that companies are more guarded. Not just smaller ones, like, definitely the bigger ones. This intense competition is going to change the nature of how AI develops. What kind of industry standards do you think we need to make AI available for public good and not just another privately controlled infrastructure?
Yes, so I think that's a very good question, and the way particularly the LLMs are growing is actually worrying, because these companies do have huge amounts of revenue with them, and they are just burning them to develop LLMs and one after another. The competition is going on. Just OpenAI, their ex-employees of OpenAI has exited OpenAI and started 3 more companies. There are multiple ones, about say 20 large companies building production grade, large scale, large language models. No, I completely understand the aspect that they will need to develop the business around with it. So I think an ecosystem has to develop going forward, keeping in mind the amount that they are burning and their impact on the environment. The impact of environment, because when we are looking at these large language models and we are looking at trillions of parameters, you are actually using up a lot of server, compute, cooling, and the whole infrastructure into the picture. But what is happening is that this discussion is very nascent state. Only a few research papers are talking about the cost and the environmental impact. Unfortunately, environmental impact is something that we cannot realize or see immediately, which is creating a big challenge. So I think an ecosystem, if they can develop, where all of them collaborate together to develop something, and then they can market it on their own. The marketing can be building business models, and taking to the B2B selling of that solution can be done separately, will be good. So this is very easy for me to say, but it will require a force to bring in, say, all the big companies and academic institutions who are developing large language models together. So if you are looking for, say, something like CERN, what CERN is doing, they are trying to find out the fundamentals of atomic physics. It's a large collaboration. I am sure one country can dedicate some amount of resource of that nature and then use it. But the fact is that they are collaborating. Multiple countries are collaborating. Some have put in their fund and they are using it. So I think when we are looking at technologies of this nature, I think such collaborations are important. The internet too also came up from research, and it was decided to make it open source. Today we are talking on the internet, we are talking about these technologies only because some entity who had developed it for 20 years, and if you go and see the development, Europe and America and everyone, they decided to make it open source. So the base model should be made open source, and that funding should come. I think this is will be required for the whole ecosystem to grow on its own. But who brings these forces together? I think that remains a challenge. Like the question, who will bell the cat? The sort of question, like how do you bring them to a common consensus, given there are business interests in play and there are huge amounts that we are talking of. These are not like really in like a few millions, really in hundreds of millions that they are burning just for building one models, and these are really enormous amount. There are examples like the seat belts, as I told you, Volvo put it in the public domain. So there are examples of people doing it, but will they do it? Will these companies do it and follow that? I think is definitely what we have to wait and see. Yes, I think Meta is putting hard, as Ashish wrote in the chat, and also there is an underlying business also. If you see the players who are doing it, it's also their vertical business things. They have their cloud business, and they on their cloud business they want to use also that. So OpenAI and Microsoft has collaboration that OpenAI has to use the Azure stack, Google has the collaboration that they will use Google Stack. So it's also promoting their own business. I think Facebook might be doing it because Facebook is not in that business of cloud. So it's not helping them. So they are very, I think they are in that, they want to be the disruptor by bringing in Llama and those models in the open ecosystem and sort of maybe disrupt the ecosystem or innovate, whatever keyword you use. But I think it's a very interesting space to watch out for. I think collaboration is what is required. If you look at sustainability and if you look into the UN, I think they should bring in standards that beyond a certain amount, even if you have money, like even if I have money, a country has money today, they cannot procure uranium and plutonium and use it for nuclear weapons or even civilian use of nuclear. But that supply chain of using a cloud infrastructure for developing a large language model, I think that is not, that doesn't have all those regulations. I think people like in the legal domain, like Aparajita was talking about when these applications, it will be nice if we can come up with a consensus. The UN Secretary Generally is interested in coming up with something of that nature. And Mr. Amandeep, who was very vocal in the GPAI summit last week, also spoke about that such systems need to be put in place when you are developing AI also. It's the development first and then the rolling out. But there are a lot of vested interest. And how can we bring on all those vested interest into picture and then build on top of it? It requires a lot of deliberation, closed room partnerships about what each party gets. Yes, it's an interesting thing. I'll stop there for now.
I think we have really an interesting discussion, but we have to bring a limit to it somehow. I just want to bring in 2 points, and I request everybody to maybe say, in a minute or half, I speak about what should be a sensible regulation or a smart regulation globally. Like if UN is talking about it, how it could be possible. What are your views on it? And we can begin with you, Aparajita. What should be a smart regulation or a sensible regulation globally? What is your view? What should it be like?
I think a smart regulation at this point is something that is, I think, based on research and has stakeholder involvement. I think it's very important to bring in, academia as well as developers, people who are lawyers, as well as civil society stakeholders to really talk about what is their experience with the technology, what do they anticipate, and what are the various impact areas that people can envision. So I would say that it should be informed. And at the same time, it needs to be dynamic because there is an industry that is going to be benefiting from this technology. There are a lot of good use cases for AI. For example, I know at GPAI, one of the discussions was about what India has done in agriculture for AI. And, there are a lot of companies who are noticing that the kind of benefit that you can have by investing in that space can be exponential, especially with, there is a bit of private sector involvement now permitted in the agriculture space in India. So it's very timely, interconnect. So it's important that the regulation, whatever, it develops, it should be customizable depending on how the technology, progresses. For example, if you want to have an additional obligation framework for certain kind of high risk use cases of AI, then be able to be open to the fact that what could be the high risk deployment of that AI, and you don't limit yourself to just a sector. For example, it's not necessary that any use of AI in healthcare would be high risk. It really depends sometimes on also the application of it within that sector as well. So there needs to be that kind of learning and that kind of development, and the regulators need to be a lot more open to hearing from the industry. And sometimes, you may want to regulate something with a lot of reticence. However, when you hear back from the industry and you see data studies, then you can be, you can liberalize it. And I keep going back to the financial services example because I think we've really seen a watershed moment in India where RBI has been so open and it's really looked at the industry to see that what is the capability with financial services and fintech in India. So they had a very controlled approach, and then they opened it up. now they've realized that lending is a space where there's a lot of, there's a possibility of misuse. So they started regulating that. So it has to be a very dynamic regulator that has informed people, and they understand the technology as well as the civil society risk. And so that, the need for regulation as well as the need to allow the industry to innovate, those can be balanced together.
Thank you so much. Dr. Roy, the same question to you. What kind of regulator we want? What kind of regulation we want?
Yeah, I think we are in the era of boundless innovation, right? So we have a clear mandate, right? We need to globally, I would say, manage rather than regulate it globally, not to constrain, but at least to unleash its potential ethically and sustainably, right? And if we can harmonize that, the harmonization is about the standards, prioritizing the ethical usage, the international cooperation, the sustainability in its own way, will ensure AI can serve the humanity, right? We respect the diversity of the values, and the most important part, the shared future. That's important because humans would have a shared future with artificial intelligence, right? There is another entity which is born. We have to understand that. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Roy. Dr. Sarkar, I want to come to you with the same question, like what kind of sensible regulator you would like to have?
So, as you all understand and believe that it's a technology that is still evolving. So at this point, I would love to have regulations which are simple and broad. I have seen the regulations of EU Act. I think they're too prescriptive at the nature, trying to define at an application level, like listing out applications, specific applications, like very specific application they are going into, which are banned, which are high risk ones. I feel that is too much at this point for a technology that is still evolving and it's early stage. I also understand the point that Europe is coming from. They are only a consumers of AI. They are not a developers, so they can have strict regulations. I much more like because only two people have come up with regulations, at least something that has gone for as a bill or a discussion. The US also has the Algorithmic Accountability Act, which has gone to the Senate a couple of times and has been discussed a couple of times, and it's in the second round, but it's not passed yet. It's much more simpler. It talks about automated decision making and what should be the contours of automated decision making. I feel that simplicity is what we need, and then sectors can pick it up on their own. Sectors and verticals can pick it up on their own, depending on the risks, depending on the domain, and depending on the scenario. So I think that is a better approach, though I think Europe wants to lead the regulation space on privacy, and what they have achieved from GDPR have given them a big boost, and they feel that AI, I personally feel that I like the US approach better. For India, I think because we have to innovate much more than regulate, maybe we're balancing that. I think I shouldn't use the term more, because I think we have to balance innovation and regulation. I think we should keep it broad and simple for now, and also let the ecosystem evolve. We don't know. Today we are, Dr. Ashish was talking about explainability. Explainability of language model is still possible, because you can look into a document, based on this document this was done. How do you explain the explainability of shapes? How do you explain that looking at two images, I infer the third image is something else? How can you explain that? Because that's not even written text. Those are pixels, and how you see a pixel and how I see a pixel can be very, very different. And that we are going into a space where this core element of explainability, transparency, accountability, till this time, these aspects are resolved. We shouldn't be trying to regulate, but again, we cannot, as governments cannot, they cannot sit idle also. So simple and broad is what my answer will be.
Ashish, what is your take on the sensible regulation?
So, I think if you go back to some of the discussion we've had, I think safety as a first principle, fairness, bias, human rights as a first principle into regulating anything, AI included. Whenever you talk about AI, we all know the potential harms. Some of the things we know the existing harms, we should anticipate some of the potential harms and base the regulation on a very simple argument of safety.
John, I think I would have liked to have you the final word on the sensibility of the regulation, and particularly, what kind of balance we could have.
Well, I have friends who helped create GDPR, and my actual behavior later today is I'll go online and click something that says accept all cookies. GDPR, in one sense, has lost a lot of its meaning. So I think for me, I'll put in the chat the opportunity, but I'll say the need. There's, again, words are really hard because I'm speaking in English and I don't know all the nuances of my words in other languages. But I'll give a quick example. A lot of indigenous languages, and there's 7,000 indigenous groups around the world, prioritize verbs over nouns. English prioritizes nouns. That's why pronouns are such a big deal. In a lot of indigenous languages, if you look at, say, a lake, a body of water, it's described as a verb. So if you think about a body of water as a verb, it is alive. It's alive. The perspective I'm interested in, and I was just thinking about a trip I took to Mumbai years ago, the main thing that people said after, oh, we're so excited because I get to meet this colleague and these colleagues who I never met in person, as an American getting on the plane was, but don't drink the water. Be really careful about the water. And I keep thinking about water. Water is the stuff of life. It's the essence of who we are. Literally, we are made of water. And I was not joking. The term cloud came for a technical term, but now the technical cloud and data, as we all know, is interoperable around the world. So speaking about the EU, and they talk about risk, and then the big, issues that happened with Facebook and Meta years ago in Dublin, and the servers were based in Dublin. And so I just want to push all that aside and recognizing I'm very aspirational, but is the biggest risk is that we are not prioritizing planet and people first in design. I didn't say regulation. I used to work in PR. You go into a big room with 1,000 sticky notes. But I also want to point out that, and you have innovation scenario planning. But is the scenario planning saying, okay, first, we're going to build something that means these large language models need water for the data centers. And we live in Mumbai. Where's the aquifer? Where's the water coming from? How is it going to affect the people there? And the Microsofts and the Metas, by the way, already doing some of the leading work in the world about how to protect that water, how to have AI protect that water. The risk is in not recognizing that the water is not going to be there a lot longer. It's not there for most people right now. Climate immigration is a massive issue, from my understanding, in India, in Africa, in the States. And so there's this opportunity to sort of take a deep breath and say, what does innovation allow us the opportunity to do? Is to say the structures that were created after the Second World War that prioritize GDP are no longer useful. And there are lots of places now saying Hugging Face. I'm a big fan of the company Hugging Face. I mentioned Dr. Sasha Lucioni, right? Human rights-based approach to regulation doesn't mean, and it shouldn't mean, hey, companies, no more innovation for you. You can't make money. Human rights is going, hey, can you go in a room and just have a list of like, here's how we know that the planet will be safe. Risk means putting stuff out into the world and then asking these questions. Then asking these questions, right? Because we haven't talked about, for instance, mental health and aspects of human agency and aspects of how, for instance, globally now, isolation and loneliness from the World Health Organization are a top risk for people's lives. Saying, well, AI can fix it and chatbots will fix it. I appreciate what Aprajita, you said about the confusion that people have, you know, and that some people in India may not recognize whatever. I've worked in this space for 15 years, talked about augmented reality, worked with some of the top companies in the world. I'm confused. I shouldn't be confused, but there shouldn't be this message to companies, your beautiful creativity needs to be hindered. But it's not hindering. Communicating with someone who doesn't understand something is an opportunity for caregiving, connection. Connection is actually about how we connect to customers, but also recognizing, and this is something I say in all my meetings now before I leave them, I do not accept the larger paradigm models of how the world economically works today because it is short-termist. It does not say, how do we actually make the world work for multiple generations? And it also says that shareholders or investors, if you come to ESG regulations, those are the people we have to focus on mostly. That it's not that they're not important, but the term we must use is stakeholders. Stakeholders is actually about equity versus saying the system that we're in, you build something, it goes to market, and let's think then about ethics and law and regulation and sort of, let's catch up. The innovation is saying this beautiful planet that we have, she, I use the pronoun she for our planet, she is telling us, and I'll close with this story. I was in Seattle doing a workshop, and there was a gentleman from, I think he was from Mumbai, actually, and beautiful face. He was like 80 years old, and we were talking about the planet. And he said, as a little boy, I would wake up and I could see, and forgive me, I probably have the city, the area wrong, but I could see the sunset in the mountains. And he said, now what I see is smog. And I almost wept because I'm like, in one sense, these amazing conversations, and thank you so much for having me in these conversations. But the real innovation is in our hearts and our minds. We haven't talked about spirit at all. You know, about the nature of, you know, Islam or Buddhism or Christianity. This is how people actually live their lives. We sort of keep those things separate in these conversations. And about children, I'm not going to say anymore that systems that don't say, do we know that child is protected first? And LLMs are not, they have not been released. I'm not trying to point fingers, but they are not, you know, read work by Dr. Tinmet Gebru about the bad science of most LLMs. Gary Marcus talks about they should have been tested before they were released. Where society says it's more important to release technologies first and then think about the planet and ethics after, we are in a society that is ripe for innovation that says beautiful technology, as we test it, who's not in the room? Women, Indigenous folks, and I'm sorry, what I meant to say from what Ms. Ron said was transdisciplinary is the only way to move forward with innovation. If there are conversations that don't include India, I would say this organization